Since another draft as recently came and went, it's pretty logical to assume that the 2022 draft class will have within it some prospects that don't live up to the hype. But since it's a little early to analyze this year's draftees, I thought it would be interesting to take a look back at some older players instead. In this video, we'll be going over a few first-round picks from the last 5 years that haven't quite lived up to expectations, and therefore have been categorized by some as busts. And with that, here are 3 NHL players that could very well be busts today. When Filip Zadina first appeared on the radar of many NHL scouts, it wasn't the first time the Halifax Mooseheads had produced such a highly regarded prospect. Nathan MacKinnon, Jonathan Drouin, and Nikolai Ehlers are just a few amongst the plethora of talent the club has produced. A gifted, agile skater, Zadina impressed spectators with his complete 200-foot game and quick shot release. Often compared to his fellow countryman David Pastrnak, Zadina tallied an impressive 44 goals in 57 games played for the Mooseheads. Therefore, after 82 total points on the season prior to draft day, Zadina placed 3rd in final rankings below Rasmus Dahlin and Andrei Svechnikov. However, once he was passed up on a few times, the Detroit Red Wings were thrilled at the time to select the forward 6th overall. Well, after making his NHL debut right away during the 2018-19 campaign, Zadina only made 9 appearances throughout. The majority of his time instead that season was spent playing for Detroit's AHL affiliate team. And really, it isn't that uncommon for prospects at all to do so. Even Trevor Zegras, for example, spent half of his 2020-21 season playing for the San Diego Gulls, and he turned out just fine. However, once the trend continued into the following season is when the concern began to take hold that Zadina may just not be what the team expected. At the present time, so far, throughout his NHL career, Zadina has only been able to tally 61 points after 160 games played. Some have attributed Zadina's lackluster performance to the mediocre coaching of Jeff Blashill. Blashill, who left Detroit with a losing record by a landslide, wasn't exactly Coach of the Year material. But on the other side of the argument was the fact that Moritz Seider was able to win the Calder under the same coach, and Lucas Raymond simultaneously thrived as well. Regardless of the reasons as to why he's been underwhelming thus far, at 22 years of age, Zadina still has plenty of time to turn things around. Not long after, the New York Rangers sent out the historic letter to fans promising a rebuild, former GM Jeff Gorton didn't waste any time. Since the Rangers eventually moved from the 6th to 2nd spot in the draft selection process of 2019, it would ensure that they would receive a talented prospect in return. As it stood prior to draft day, the 2nd overall selection was projected to be Finnish forward Capo Kakko. One of the things that instantly set Kakko apart from his peers was his highly developed frame. At 6'2" and a few pounds shy of 200, Kakko used his size to his advantage and became known as a very tough opponent to try and take off of the puck. Even though he also made waves with the Finnish national team, Kakko had most notably shattered a record while playing for Liga. With 22 goals, he was able to narrowly pass Alexander Barkov's previous record held of 21, and in result was the most by any draft-eligible player in league history. Therefore, knowing his size and the success that he had while playing with grown men overseas, it was almost expected that Kakko would excel immediately in the NHL in his rookie year. However, that wasn't exactly the case. Under former head coach David Quinn, Kakko struggled immensely to acclimate to Quinn's questionable system. And really, as far as point totals are concerned, his production was about the same under coach Gerard Gallant as well. So far, following 157 games played, Kakko has only been able to notch 58 points so far, which is interestingly pretty close to how Zadina has done in comparison. Despite this though, it's possible that Kakko has more to give, and has been dealt a bad hand early on in his career. Not only was he a victim of poor coaching to start, but he also joined a pretty stacked team, and wasn't exactly given tons of playing time. Since he's still in the earlier stages of his career, it seems premature to give up on the forward just yet. The 2017 draft is one that's come to haunt the Philadelphia Flyers organization and its fan base. Even though the draft class didn't have a Connor McDavid or Austin Matthews at the forefront, like years before, the main prize, as we now know today, was defenseman Cale Makar. But prior to the draft festivities, the top 3 prospects were Nico Hischier, Nolan Patrick, and Miro Heiskanen. An all-around, highly skilled player, Patrick impressed onlookers with his speed and his ability to make plays happen. Even though he was injured for a portion of his draft-eligible season, Patrick was still able to record more than a point per game, with 46 and only 33 games played. He also helped to propel the Brandon Wheat Kings team to its first championship win in 20 years. At the time, Patrick was viewed as being potentially a franchise player, and someone that Flyers GM Ron Hextall didn't want to pass up on. Despite the draft order, however, years later in retrospect, this move would come back to haunt the team. After nearly 2 seasons with Philly, Patrick wasn't able to exceed 31 points throughout. And unfortunately, things continued to get worse for Patrick in 2019. As the forward was diagnosed with migraine disorder, he was sidelined thereafter for the entire 2019-2020 season. Patrick returned for the next campaign, but unfortunately was only able to notch an underwhelming 9 points in 52 games played. In July of last year, the team decided to cut its losses and traded Patrick to Vegas in a 3-team deal that in turn granted them Ryan Ellis. Even after arriving in Sin City, Patrick continued to battle injuries and was only able to play 25 games last season. As if the hardships that Patrick has had to endure weren't enough, Flyers legend Bobby Clarke decided to stir things up earlier this year by revealing that none of the team's scouts wanted to select him at all. According to Clarke himself, it was former GM Ron Hextall who went out on a limb for the prospect by deciding to take him over Cale Makar, the pick that everyone else reportedly wanted. Even though it's hard to tell what's true and what's fiction, one thing's for certain: that Patrick has indeed been a bust.